Okay, hopefully everybody can see that well. Sweet. All right. Well, this is us. We said all this already. That's Chance. So I want to ground us in a thought practice to make sure that we have some trust established here in this group. We encourage you all to participate. We have some moments where we're going to ask you to drop things in the chat or silently reflect, or in our Q&A opportunity, we really want you to feel comfortable saying anything that comes to mind. So this is our group promise, that we founded an open and honest and private sharing space. And we all here make the pledge that the storytelling stays in this group, and we trust each other enough to get honest with ourselves and honest with each other for this hour and a half with, no consequences. So hopefully that feels good to everybody here. So we're here to talk about leadership skills and entrepreneurialism. And I like to ground that conversation in concepts of what is a business that is values driven or values forward. So we've all maybe heard of the bottom line, even if we don't really have an experience in business, right? The bottom line references the context of how the business is doing in terms of profit, right? So maybe you've heard the term profit or loss statement or income statement, and the number that's at the bottom of it after you have your income and take out all of your expenses is called the bottom line, right? And another way of saying this is that businesses think about their motivation based on profit, right? Then a while ago, I'm not sure exactly when, some environmentalists came up with the triple bottom line. So not just the profit mattered to business, but also the environmental effect of the business and the social effect of the business. There's a new way to measure success. And it's oftentimes referred to as people, planet, and profit. Those are the three bottom lines. And then even later in management and business theory came along this quadruple bottom line, which I didn't hear about very long ago. And I got pretty excited about it because what it adds is purpose, which we define as well-being, our own self-well-being. And that can be, a spiritual, cultural center, something that's giving meaning to your life. And this is sort of a way that I like to describe what a sustainable business is. So if we look outside to another culture for some inspiration, Japanese culture has this sense called ikigai, and it comes from two words. One is life, and one is effect or result or worth. And so essentially putting the two together, what it's defined as is your reason for being. And it's more than the intersection of all of these things. It's the common ground between what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. So this design here in the middle is called a Venn diagram with all these overlapping circles. And you can see what happens when you put like the top one, what you love, with something that you're good at, then you get passion. And you put something that the world needs together with something you can get paid for, that's your vocation, right? You put all these things together and you get what they call ikigai. This is another image that describes it with a little bit more definition and a little bit more detail. So ikigai, if we can find it, leads to growth and leads to mastery, and it is challenging and it is freeing, and it involves commitment and belief and sort of dedication to a particular way of life, but it also takes into account what is most important to you. It's boosting you up. It's giving you more energy than it takes away. It's something deep inside of you that's giving you this purpose. So if we go back to bottom line businesses for a minute, this is an image that quadruple bottom line businesses. Here's our four bottom lines, right? People, planet, purpose, and prosperity. In the middle, we have sustainability, sustainable in all ways, right? And then this is another way of imagining these businesses where the purpose is encapsulating everything else, right? It's holding everything else. It's holding the business. the profit, the people, the planet, those elements that we're working towards are all meaningful, but they're being held inside of the overarching purpose. So I'm curious just to hear, throw in the chat if one of the two images appeals better to you, more to you. I'll go back to this one, right? So we've got the four elements all combining for sustainability and purpose sort of balanced with the other three. Or we've got everything being held by this overarching purpose. So don't be shy. Put your thoughts in the chat. Other people can respond to them that way and get inspired. So what are core values? The core values are unchanging qualities that a business or organization deems most essential. And they really should show up in everything that you do. They should be integrated. They should be known and integrated, and then sort of they come out in expression in your life work. And that's a phrase that I really like using a lot. Instead of having life over here and work over here and work-life balance, as if we mush it all together, then that's going to lead us to, more easily to this sense of ikigai or purpose, right? So your values are this personal beacon for your business decisions, not just the business beacon, but connected to your personal values, right? Guiding you as a principle, but also they're what's leading the business. Following your core values is what provides sort of a consistent outside perception of who you are. It's sort of like your creed, right? And it's the cornerstone for how other people can perceive you if it's consistent, if you're sort of always embodying and living those core values. So ethical leadership, which is what we're here to talk about today, is knowing those core values and investigating them as something that you do that's just as important as your daily business practices, and having the courage to integrate them in all of your actions. And once you do that, once you figure them out, like what these beacons are that's driving you forward, they actually can help you make day-to-day very difficult business decisions. And if you didn't have a set of kind of standards or guidelines that you were working by, you might be sort of swimming in the open water a little bit more. So they can actually and should trickle down into day-to-day decisions about employees and what products you're making and whether you're going to add a property or not. So I have a core values exercise for y'all that will be part of the materials that you'll see inside of the Mighty Networks course. And it's a really simple exercise that allows you to investigate what your personal core values look like, what your business's core values are like, and mush them all together. And it's pretty fast. So I encourage you all to download that and take a look at it as an aftermath of this presentation. So these core values, they sort of are the seeds of this quadruple bottom line business, right? And they can help you reveal goals in each of these different areas. What do you want to see out of your business in terms of profit, in terms of its effect on the environment, in terms of your own inner purpose and its effect on the people around you? So and said another way, this is learning how to measure business with a different type of currency, right? This is a different type of capital. When we hear the word capital, we really think more about money, right? I think first and foremost, but there's all these different kinds of capital. There's social capital. This is the, people version of social capital, is by elevating that as a measure of our business, right? And saying, oh, if we do good there, then we do good overall, then we're performing well. There's natural capital. That's the environmental side of things. There's intellectual capital. What are we putting out into the world that sort of betters the intellectual capital of everybody around us? There's cultural capital that's investing in or expressing pieces of our culture around us. So it's really an idea that turns profit on its head. And it's sort of like saying, okay, profit's cool. We know we need it. We have to be profitable in order to be viable. we have to be profitable in order to be open and live these core values. We can't just lose money and be high minded and have all these cool ideas, because then our business just won't be open to express those cool ideas. So profit stays, but alongside of it, we can bring up these other concepts of other types of capital that are just important. So there's a link in here to a pretty cool article that I encourage you guys all to check out after as part of a follow up here. And all these links, when you download the presentation, are clickable. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Chance for a minute. And Chance, I will forward your slides whenever you want me to.
Okay. Yeah. So when we had originally thought about this presentation and what we're going to be putting in it, especially when it comes to perspectives from not just indigenous, but specifically in this instance, a Lakota perspective. One thing that we really look at, like we look at the first one there when we say regenerative agriculture as conceptually aligned with Lakota culture and thought and practice. What we tend to find is we see this intersection that when we begin these conversations about what does regenerative agriculture look like and how is that put into practice, what are the basis for a lot of the principles within regenerative agriculture. And we see that conceptually, a lot of the aligning factors and your motivations for entering into regenerative agriculture are not so different from a Lakota-based perspective into wanting to develop an enterprise or wanting to, as Olivia said, the work-life model, that those two things are really inseparable when you think about them. And so when we tend to look at principles from regenerative agriculture and from an indigenous perspective, we tend to find that there's so much, everything transitions so seamlessly between the two. And so when we look at, just like the next one says, when we look at the ag concepts, we're a teaching tool to our communities and to meetings like this. I always use the reference that we can usually look at carbon sequestration, and we're trying to look at how does that apply to any models what we're looking at, because you hear carbon sequestration everywhere these days. When we tell it to an elder, it'll go right over their head. But when we break down the concepts and the mechanics of what it is that's taking place from a regenerative agriculture perspective, then they can start to reaffirm to us in Lakota about, oh, what you're talking about is this, or what you're talking about is this. And we've had this experience both at the IAC conference where we spoke with elders from other indigenous nations, from Apache, from so on and so forth, and they have very similar belief systems and very similar concepts. But they're all very much aligned from this sense of purpose, this sense of belonging. And so when we look at the concepts of regenerative ag in a enterprise, so to speak, and when it's from an indigenous perspective, it's really quite fascinating. And which brings me to the next point of diversity. When we look at the multitude of nations that have existed here and the perspectives, one thing that we constantly find is diversity. Diversity has always been this driving factor. And when we look at regenerative ag operations, enterprises, we tend to see that diversity is also playing this role of not just, like Olivia said, in terms of the profitability of an enterprise, but also the adaptability and resiliency of what an enterprise is capable of. One thing that we're looking at right now when it comes to bison integration or livestock integration is that taking a second look at what would usually be looked at as, let's say, pestilence, if it's in something, let's say, prairie dogs, for example, that there can be some common ground there in terms of what is an alternative way that these two things can coexist, as opposed to looking at more of a solutions-based approach to a lot of these. And I think that really speaks to, as we look at Lakota culture or any indigenous culture, the very grounding principle in all of these things is our sense of purpose, our sense of where do we belong within not just our families, but our communities or our area that we have become a part of, and what does our impact look like, and what is it that we need to best position ourselves so we can better I think what we really begin to touch on is the selflessness of a lot of these concepts of being able to push things forward in that manner. So, go ahead.
So let's talk a little bit about the definition of what is a leader. We're going to get into a couple of theories of leadership here, not like heavy, weird academic theories. So this is a quote from a gentleman called Robert Greenleaf, who developed a theory called servant leadership that we're going to learn about today. And he says a leader has a disposition to take risks, to initiate, to provide ideology, build structure, and in doing so, go out ahead and show the way in a conscious choice. So just take a minute in the chat and give us all like 1 minute of quiet thought to write on a piece of paper for yourself or drop in the chat if you feel comfortable who considers themselves a leader or who considers themselves a manager and why. What makes you a leader or a manager? What's the difference? And if you don't see yourself as a leader, what do you think you're lacking? What are the activities or skills that a leader does that you maybe are working towards or don't have? And we're going to come back to this later and kind of unwrap these definitions, but just take a minute and drop in the chat your thoughts or take some notes on a piece of paper that you can come back to. Okay. Chance. We'll talk about the Lakota version of the definition of a leader.
Yes, absolutely. So one thing that we really use when we're looking at the definition of a leader, it really comes to, I guess, the origin or the grounding. And you're probably going to hear me hammer that in this entire presentation. But one thing that was always kind of passed down to me is a seed planted in truth can weather all storms, which can seem very cryptic, but also very cliche in some instances. But the simplicity of it is that anything grounded from a place of integrity, from a place of honesty, has no other option but to persist and to be resilient in any and all circumstances. And so when we look at that from a indigenous based space, what does leadership look like? And like I said, all of the visions and all of the guiding principles that you see through all of our leaders throughout time, not just from a Lakota perspective, have always been from that sense of responsibility that we're all gifted with this life here to make the best of what we can, but also how can we make that impact of not just our generation, but all generations moving forward. And so when I think you look at the long vision, I think that's what, in terms of leadership, from the indigenous perspective of having that long vision of not just seeing what did someone do 7 generations ago to ensure that I'm here doing what I'm doing now, and what can I do from here on out for generations that follow me, and what does that look like? And having that connectedness, that interdependence on one another, and definitely seeing how steps I'm taking today in my business, my operation, my life is going to be impacting not just my community, but those around me. And so one thing that I always tend to use is I got from a friend of mine who's Tlingit, and they would always reference the totem pole about how, and you hear it in a lot of different sayings and whatnot. People are always like, oh, well, they're the highest on a totem pole. But in their culture the way that he had explained it to me. And it's very similar to the Lakota perspective, but usually it's the one who's the most important, most relied on is the one on the bottom. And so you definitely see that from our perspective of when you're a leader, you're not just the immense sense of responsibility that comes with that, but in a lot of ways, it's not very glamorous because you're almost that of, I guess, a doormat, that you're there so that you can lift people up and people can use you to both enhance themselves in the community, but also rely on you when needed. And so, and I touched on this already in the previous slide, but I think where you see a lot of our intersection of what Olivia and I are talking about is that reliance of what comes from within in terms of how is it that we put this into play? How is it that we put this into action? And it all goes back again to being reaffirming our relationships, our kinships, our whether it's in our business, whether it's in our enterprises. I think that's and I think one of the first ways that you begin to do that is really have an honest conversation with yourself of what are your core values? What is the things that you find that you're personally connected to when it comes to developing this quadruple bottom line? And so what does it take to do that? One of the things is a personal inventory or accounting of what is it that you really believe in? How does that interact with the enterprise or your life way that you may currently be involved in? Are there changes that need to be made? Or where is it that you're at now and where is it that you hope to go? And how is it that your guiding principles help to get you there? So, like I said, I think from a lot of these perspectives, when we compare that to that of a historical accounting of our leaders, one thing that they're really good at is both taking our greatest chiefs, our greatest even community members now, is being able to take that sense of who they are to their very core, and then both being able to put that into action, being able to not just see the macroscopic level of what's going on, but also the moving parts of how you're going to get there and have an honest conversation with yourself on how those things take place.
So I think building off of some of these thoughts that Chance has brought in, there's this element of humility and vulnerability, which is not something I think that in modern day American capitalistic culture we really associate with capitalistic leadership. And what we're putting forth as a definition of a leader inside of these values-driven businesses is that your heart center place and how vulnerable you are is what actually allows you to lead. So leaders in this definition are not trained, but they evolve, they grow through their experience. And they're guided by this strong self-vision, which is exactly what Chance was just talking about. So it starts with that self-determination and that self-reflection. And then strengths slowly emerge in a natural way, right? And if we can recognize this idea of vocation and passion, then we are on our way to our ikigai, our ultimate purpose. And that is the source of our own leadership. And inside of that, there is also the idea that we're doing this not just for ourselves. And again, that's where Chance is bringing in the community, future generations, past generations. We're doing this to also inspire others around us. And that is the true definition of a leader in our perspective here. So this is a quote from a woman named Brené Brown, who's a researcher and a thought leader inside of this, getting really comfortable inside of our own vulnerability and letting that be the place that we act out from. So this guy that I mentioned before, Robert Greenleaf, was an AT&T executive, just run of the mill, big company, at its prime in the 70s, comes up with an essay called Servant Leadership that was inspired by characters in Hermann Hesse's Journey to the East. And these are archetypal characters that he noticed and jumped off from. And in this book, there's the servant who acts with integrity and spirit, builds trusts, and lifts people up to let them grow. And then there's the leader who's out front, who's trusted, who shapes others' destinies, going out alone, right? And he posits, what if these two identities are merged into one, into servant leader? And if we do that, then leadership looks like a long-term transformational way of life, aka ikigai, that has positive change in our society. So inside of servant leadership, we as leaders are here first and foremost to serve our organizations, our businesses, and everything and everyone that's part of them. So the way I really like to think of it is service leadership. And that's partially because I have a really hard time digesting and condoning the term servant. And so from here on out, I have sort of switched the terminology to service leadership, because really that's what the root is. So the servant leader is servant first, and it begins with the natural feeling that one wants to serve others. And the conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. And that person is very different from one who is leader first, perhaps because of the need to assuage an unusual power drive or to acquire material possessions. The difference between leader first and servant first individual manifests itself in the care taken by the servant. So first, to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. And the best test is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, and more autonomous, and more likely themselves to be in service to others? So that's from the original essay. And if they're more likely to be in service to others, that is how they then become leaders in this service leadership paradigm. We focus primarily on the growth and well-being of people and communities to which they belong. It's an ethical use of power and empowerment rather than just like de facto use of power. And the servant leader uses as little power as possible. And I think that this can often be perceived as soft. There is a bit of a, undertone of a prejudice that listening and empathizing inside of business is the opposite of taking action and taking control. But really, that's what we're encouraging all of us to do here, is to act from that place of vulnerability and to have the service of others as the best expression of our style of leadership. Chance, this is you.
So when we look at characteristics of an indigenous leader, we always look at a lot of the following traits are usually at the top of the list. I mean, when we compare it to band to band, people to people, tribe to tribe, these are usually the ones that you see that will kind of rise to the top. I think one that you see, and like I said, some of our greatest leaders, not just past, but both present, is this acute self-awareness of these honest conversations that take place of what are my limitations? What are my strengths? Where is it that I'm trying to take any goals that I have as far as the direction I'm going to lead everybody? And I think that also comes from, again, hammering it again, the belonging and responsibility, the belonging of your Tioshpai, to your Tiwahe, to your people, your enterprise, your business, but also what responsibility do you then have to put forth action and put forth effort? We always hear the phrase that passion and effort are both free. And so it costs you nothing but your time and energy, but your energy to put into what is it that you're going to be putting forward. And so I think when you look at that, and again, you see selflessness over and over and over, because that is a theme that's always recurring throughout our culture, throughout all indigenous cultures. This sense of being able to put aside my today for everyone's tomorrow. And what does that look like as we move forward? And so I think when we move in those spaces, um, if you're practicing true leadership from an indigenous perspective, it has to go hand in hand with honesty. And so being able to be honest, the very simple definition of integrity is being able to be honest when no one is looking. And so I think that was always represented in all of our cultures, like I said, in all of our greatest leaders. And so I think when we're building to the how of that, I think it also begins with this vision of where it is that we have this concept of where we can lead our people, but also our vision as individuals. Like, what is it? What does our self-talk look like in the morning? What does it look like when we're with our families? What does it look like um, as we talk with other tribes, with other groups, and this sense of overcoming the I for the we? And so that's also not to say that it's not without its ambition, that it's not without its wanting a better tomorrow for our communities, our enterprises, our businesses. What does that look like? That's not to say those things aren't included, because they very much are. And I think you've seen Kelsey mention it in the chat, and it's very much a part of what our greatest leaders possess, but is also being proactive instead of reactive. That we're trying to be, especially when you look at the environment and the area that we all come from in our communities. You have no choice but to be proactive when it comes to the weather, to the market, to the operations. You definitely have to be on your toes at all times. And so it's just more or less practice in to be energetically efficient, so to speak, and being proactive. And so I think that's very much needed for a leader in today, in any enterprise, especially agriculture. The other one is how are we observant? You see this in our leaders, not just being observant of what's happening internally, but both externally. How am I reacting, or how am I being proactive in certain situations in opposed to my communities? And definitely having that, being able to use that ability to be observant, but also be thoughtful and both analytical. And a lot of these things, obviously, they're not just going to be blessed with and someone wakes up with these things. All these things take work every single day, but they are able to be practiced. They are able to be honed. They are able to be refined. And I think for me personally, the biggest one that I see on here, aside from being selfless, is being adaptable, be able to not be so rigid and conformed where we're just going to, I guess, ride the ship until it crashes, that we can take things another direction if we have to, and having that humility to be able to be adaptable, that even if a plan isn't working out, to be able to look and say, hey, you know what, these honest conversations about this is where we need to take something else. And so definitely being able to be adaptable and be resilient.
So here's some other characteristics that some of them echo a lot of what Chance said, and some of them just take them a little bit further and put different words on them. So you can sort of choose what speaks to you, right? So these are the key moral behaviors that are attempted. And I think that that's a really good, important point, is that we're just trying here. We are acquiring these skills. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But what that means is that this is open for everybody. Listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment. So I'd love to hear we'll go back one, some of these that Chance mentioned here, and then some of these, which ones really leap out to you, and which ones are the characteristics that you feel a leader embodies. So what's really behind all of this is spirit in the face of the uncertain path, right? And anybody that has this is and running a business is an entrepreneur. It doesn't really matter how big or small you are. And leadership is separate from expertise. And it's not a personality style. I think we hear this natural born leader thing often, and really want to debunk that in this conversation. What we're proposing is that anyone can grow into these characteristics. And it's not just being charismatic or magnetic or loud or taking control, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about the fact that it's oftentimes not being in control, about not being in control, and about listening. And some of those skills, some of those traits are can be seen as weaknesses rather than strengths, I think. So let's not depend on this kind of predisposition towards leadership that we've been maybe taught that some people have and some of us just don't have. Let's cultivate our own leadership in ourselves.
So building off of how Olivia was putting that into action, what that looks like for you guys, we're hitting on these intersections of both servant leadership and indigenous leadership. Like I said, you tend to see there's tons of overlap from one to the other. It could almost be argued that maybe that was maybe borrowed from somewhere, but we'll get into that another time. Just teasing Olivia. But like you said, it is what we give, not what we get, that defines us as leaders and establishes the legacy that we leave behind in our organizations, our communities, and our lives. And so when we build off of that in itself, like I said, you're always going to hear this. I believe we had a leader in our community who has since passed, but he would always have this way about him. And he was one of the most successful, not just ag operators, but traditional leaders in our area. And he would always have this way of putting it that I don't care whose name is on it. Let's just get it done. And so having that, someone who was very, I guess, looked at as a high esteemed person of high character, but also having that innate part of himself where it's like, it's not about me. We need to get this done for everybody else. And so I think that in both a hard and fast way of delivering that, I think that's how I see that put into action sometimes. And like I said, as servant leaders, we tend to give up something we want, whether it's our what would be the word for it? Our recognition for something we do, and our acknowledgement even, or sometimes it's resources, whatever it is, but being able to give up what we want for those around us, so that, like I said, you're always going to hear this, so that the whole may move forward. The sum is greater than its parts, and so you definitely see that in a lot of our indigenous leadership. So when we look at indigenous entrepreneurialism, I think it's almost innate to every community, every individual, that we all possess skills and certain drives when it comes to not just making a living for ourselves, but also providing for our families, for our communities. And so I think the ability to be an entrepreneur, side hustle, whatever it is you want to call it, has always been innate to Native people to great extents, because a lot of times we always have to come, you think, in my opinion, this is born from self-reliance, that it's born from resilience of having to be able to take care of yourself throughout time. And so when we look at our economic systems, for example, of how we trade and barter, of how in a lot of ways we're only limited by our own efforts of being able to go out and make that better living, that it was the self-limiting beliefs, I guess, was our only obstacle, that we have every opportunity to be able to do that. And so when I think about, there's an exercise here that is mentioned that I usually try and do at most speaking engagements. And it really had a profound impact on me. It's difficult for all of us to do it right now because logistically it's just not going to work. But the gist of it is a lot of times when we're given a talk about something, I'll have people in the crowd, everyone raise and make a fist. have maybe the person they're sitting next to, and like I said, maybe and today it's a little hard to do, but the person sitting next to you will ask to open the other person's fist, and so it's comical and be able to see everybody trying to open the other person's fist, and everyone's going for it, and it's a great time, really good icebreaker, and then once we're done, I'll have everybody raise their hand. How many people opened the other person's fist? How many was successfully did it? We'll see a few people raise their hands like I did it. But I think what really drives it home is when I ask the follow-up question is, how many of you asked the other person to open your fist? And I think that's a really to the point example of the difference of indigenous. I usually apply that to the agriculture, but it can just as easily be applied to entrepreneurialism is the forceful nature of how we're going to do something. Or did you ask it? Are we taking something by the horns, or are we working in collaboration with it, in a partnership with it? And so that's something I definitely think is a big difference in what we see here. And so I think that also applies to our native belief systems. When it comes to like our revenue, I think you've seen Olivia mention like the revenue-based business models of how they can be extractive at times. And so. I think you have this one, Olivia, don't you? Or, I'm teasing.
Hopefully in the future.
Yeah.
To take that as a challenge.
Yeah. And so when one thing we decided to put in here is what do these words look like from our culture and from our from the Lakota language for now. Like I said, these can be just as easily in Northern Japan, Apache, whatever other cultures you like. But having my knowledge of what I have, we just decided to put kind of a short lexicon of what a lot of these words are. And some of them we can expand on, some of them we'll go through. They're pretty self-explanatory. But the first one I really like, which is Wakishake. It's resiliency. And what I really love about the word Wakishake is that resiliency is also the word for buoyancy. What better example of resiliency is than buoyancy, that you're going to be able to survive tension on the water by giving into it. I mean, that's when you look at resiliency. I mean, I always thought that was just very poetic and very to the point. The next one is being assertive or ambitious. And so in Lakota, we say, and so that one is, we can probably spend about 10 minutes on that word, so we won't at this one. But the other one is which is understanding and realization. And the way we say that is it's not just an understanding from an individual perspective, but also as a greater whole, that we're all coming to realization in the same space, in the same thought. And so I really think it's very refreshing, especially when we're talking what it is we're talking about today. And then you see just the word Lakota in general being able to not just define what a lot of our tribes, our Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, but what does it mean to be an ally? What does it mean to be in collaboration with all that you see around you, your surroundings, the groups that come around? And so being able to be adaptable, why wouldn't you use the word that defines us, which is Lakota? And so it's really a beautiful word. All these are really beautiful words, but the other one is Waushila, which can mean compassion or kindness, being able to have the compassion and kindness, not just for yourself, but for those around you. My grandma always used to put it that you can't pour from a cup that's empty. And so being able to cultivate that in yourself to be able to share with others, I mean, I think that's something that's very, very much needed. And then when you look at a lot of what Olivia has been talking about in terms of the foresight, being able to see that those trends or see the action that needed to be taken. In our language, we would say "ichiksapa." And so, and then the last one here is humility. There's tons of different ways to say humility because, like I said, it permeated almost every facet of our culture and of our people. But one of the ways here is wa'ushichi. And so, the way this version is put out there, is that it's not just being able to be humble, but also have that inner knowledge, that inner working of your own limitations, your own strengths, your own place in your community, which is very much what we've been talking about here today. So,
awesome, Chance. I'll be studying. So this is something that Chance and I talked a lot about also in some of our conversations that we both really feel strongly about, and that we hope to be able to bring stories of failure into every one of these Meet to Market courses, because we think that they're really the things that we learn the best from. They're essentially more meaningful than our successes. They're a bigger source of strength. And leadership means that we're looking at those failures as opportunity. And this is a matter of bending the mind and getting creative and changing our perspective and not dwelling on the hardship, but seeing it as an opening door into something else, a moment to learn, a moment to change, a moment to adapt. These are sort of like, I think of them like little fissures, cracks that are bringing light in for us and allowing us to change and grow and move forward. And otherwise we would be pretty naive, because we wouldn't know exactly all the time what we were doing exactly that brought us that success. So I encourage you all to document your failures and to not forget about them or try and cover them up, but to share them and to share them with each other, to seek out other people's perspectives on your own hardships or failures, and not feel protective of them, because they are really our most valuable lessons. And this is, again, getting back to that humility. There's really no room for ego here inside of the sense of leadership. And every single one of you that is running a business is a leader. And I think that's the underlying essence of what we're talking about here. And this is, growing out of your failures and talking about them and not being shy about them is an instrument of improvement. And that is a key leadership tactic. So we have a few slides here on how to do this. We've talked a lot about the concepts behind leadership, and now we want to give you some more practical ways to actually put it into action. So these are still, somewhat theoretical, but really, what are we doing to embody these things that we maybe are now convinced that we believe in? So acceptance and adaptation, we talked a lot about. Accepting that you're not in control of very much, right? We think of a leader as maybe being in control, but most of the time, a leader means being comfortable when you're out of control. And really, the only thing you can count on is that in small business, you have no idea what the world's going to throw at you. And this quote comes from a guy named Ari Weinzweig, who's written a ton of books about entrepreneurship and leadership. And they all have anarchy in the title. And we have a resources page at the back of the presentation that has some links to some of his writings. And he's a dude that started a deli out of college, and it grew into this massive multi-million-dollar set of 12 businesses. And one of their most successful businesses actually teaches leadership skills and service. So I've read some of his books and seen him speak a few times. He's a super down-to-earth guy, and I really love the thoughts that he brings to the table. So he's who I sort of switch to at this point in the conversation to pull some inspiration from. Believe that you can do the impossible. It's literally what other people what is not doing, and it's part of what sets you apart. And never give up on that goal of improvement. You can't really achieve something and then just say, okay, I did it and I'm keeping going. I'm going to continue to invest in self-improvement and learning and new ideas. Consistently communicate your vision. What does that even mean? What are you communicating? You don't have that idea? Make a mission statement. Write down your core values. You're going to get an exercise for core values, and I encourage you all to get in touch if you want to talk about mission statements too, and what they are and how they can be formulated. And this guy, Ari Weinzweig, in all of his books has courses and webinars and whole chapters about how to write a mission statement. And it's not hard. It's just about looking inwards. Manage in an ethical manner, which means essentially just walking the walk and the talk. And give service. I think we've covered that one. as much as we possibly can. But essentially the concept is that you giving service to those who represent you in your business, like your employees, or those who you deal with in your business, like your vendors, that is the best representation of your business itself. And your service quality will only be as good as the service you give the others around you. Learning and teaching, making a time to learn each week. I know that sounds impossible, but it's what keeps us alive. And then making time to teach and engaging those people that are involved in your business to do the same. Let your staff or partners or interns or volunteers or whoever engage in teaching, not just learning. And then create clear expectations. So provide good tools and systems and good two-way streets for communication. Be sure your people can know what's expected of them. Do they have the tools to do their work right? And do they have the opportunity to do what is best? And this gets into, talking about how to communicate constructive criticism well. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute in terms of team building. We could have a whole class on team building, but we're just kind of putting some nuggets in here. So let's take a minute, and literally 1 minute, and go back to that original question that we had some silent reflection about. And given everything that Chance and I have been throwing at you, I want you to reflect on your identity as a business owner, or in any role that you're in, as an employee, as a parent, as an elder, and call out 2 reflections that this dialogue has inspired in you regards to your sense of leadership and the things you want to discover or develop or explore in your role and in your identity as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a parent. And what resonates about these concepts and what doesn't, and what seems hard or confusing. So I just want you to take 30 seconds and drop it in the chat or write it on your little piece of paper. And I encourage you guys to drop in the chat because I think it'll also, allow other people to have new ideas percolating. All right. We're going to talk about some nuts and bolts stuff. Like I said, that's a lot of maybe perspective changing information. It's a lot of ideas that I hope you all can continue to masticate and transform inside of you, and what works for your belief system and what works for your place in life, where you're at in your trajectory with your relationship with your life work. But there's also some brass tack stuff. So just some quick tips about how to do this, right? So this is a little image from my guy, Ari Weinswag's books and training resources. And I want you to take a minute and look at this. Where do you spend your time? For those of you who are already running some kind of business, doesn't matter how big or small, it could be 5 head a year. It could be a t-shirt company, whatever. Or you could be just at the outset of developing your business. Where do you spend your time? What percentage is working in the business? What percentage is working on the business? And what percentage is working on yourself, if you had to break it down? So what does that mean? Working in the business is day to day, actually getting the shit done, production and sales, making the work of your business go. Working on the business is never as pressing as working in the business, usually in our perception. And it's easy to overlook it, but totally necessary to work efficiently in the business or have the business work efficiently is working on the business. So it's organizational systems, operations, processes like SOPs, standard operating procedures, marketing, stakeholder engagement, financial analysis, strategic planning, visioning, dreaming, right? Making maps and drawings of where you want to go, research, market research, going to the farmer's market and seeing what other people are selling, business and community outreach, like having coffee with a colleague. That is equally and arguably maybe more important than the day-to-day work. And then same with working on yourself. That's what we've been talking about for an hour. Working on yourself as a leader, learning, professional development opportunities, conferences. You guys win because you're already taking an hour and a half to work on yourself inside of this webinar. So kudos to you for that. And then taking that out into your community, sharing your learning experiences with the people around you. So here's my recommendation on how to actually make this happen, because I know what many of you are thinking is like, I don't have time for that at all. So here's some guidelines. What if we took 2 hours a week working on the business? Just 2. Find a day, find a time of day that's calm. Kids are at school. It's not the beginning of the week. And find 2 hours to work on the business in any way, shape, or form. And you know what? Inside of that, you can put work on yourself, right? One or the other, or both. You have an extra couple of hours, throw yourself in an extra 2 hours. And then what if every 6 months you took 3 to 4 hours? That's not even half a day. That's like half a work day for big picture planning and thinking. Now, do I do this myself? I try really hard because it's really rewarding. It's very creative. It's very fun. It's way more fun than doing the day-to-day work. And, you know, it doesn't really matter how much time you carve out. What matters is that you schedule it and you can move the schedule and you just keep it at some point, right? Knowing it's important. Starting to elevate this idea of doing some planning and some visioning. And annually is also my recommendation, is sitting down and thinking about your business in a much more concentrated way. And how do we do this? Like, what if you could take some sort of like mini retreat, like a sabbatical, like a vacation? Now, I know we all want to take vacation with our families or with our friends and get away from our work. But again, what we're espousing is an idea here that like your work is your life. And so what if we can make it fun? And spend even just half a day in a beautiful place out in nature thinking about our business. And I guarantee you that you will see results as that. And then you make a plan. I mean, it can be on a piece of paper I'm talking about, you know. Check in on your plan. Like every few months, where are you at with it? In terms of just general day-to-day stuff, good tools for good leaders, get a calendar. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It could be analog. Mine is still analog. Don't be fooled by like my big headphones. Mine is still a piece of paper, right? Whatever works for you, and put anything you feel like you are responsible for in it. And it doesn't matter if you change the dates, just make sure they exist. Then there's some tools here for task management. I still make lists, but lots of people like project management tools, and there's a number of them listed here that can help you. Track your time. I can't emphasize this enough. I know it's crazy that I'm talking to a bunch of farmers and telling them to time track what they do, but it's as simple as putting a tiny notebook in your pocket and writing down either while you're doing it or at the end of the day. It takes 2 seconds. What are you working on? The reason this is important is because it allows you to better plan what takes time in your business, right? Where you need to put your energies moving forward. And once it's like a muscle, once you get good at it, you will find that you recuperate all this time because you're able to better plan where your energy and time is actually going. And also, some people that I know, this came from a group of elder female shepherds. Track your energy as you're doing things. How are you feeling? And how did that affect your productivity? I thought it was the coolest suggestion. Like, okay, it took me 2 hours and I was in a really bad mood the whole time. And again, we're talking about whatever simple way makes sense for you. So here's a link to Zing Train Theories on Time Management. Also some really good tips in there. And planning for the unplanned. Actually observing how much time per week has been dedicated to putting out fires and doing the stuff that is not in all of these tools and agenda. It's not in your task management program. It's nowhere. It's just the crap that has totally erupted in your life. We all understand that that is a reality, and it's a very big reality in small business, and it is a huge reality in livestock-based small business. So just noting how much time you actually take, like use your time tracking for that. I started doing this in my first business and it was like shocking because then I knew that literally every 3 to 4 hours at least every week was going to be a total shit show. And I just started to plan for it. And then, okay, so that doesn't happen. You just got 3 or 4 hours that you didn't expect to have in your week. And maybe you can use that to work on your business instead of in your business. It's like, bonus. So those are just some real practical applications of all of the big ideas that we're talking here. And I have lots more things to say on that front. So please reach out to me if you want more of those little dorky tips. But we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk to Kelsey, a real live producer, about her sense of leadership and her trajectory in her business. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see your face nice and big.
Sounds great.
And why don't you just start telling us a little bit about the trajectory of the business, and so kind of where you started and where you started to go and what inside of your business model did you at some point see that motivated you to take a different direction?
Mm-hmm. There's some stuff that Chance was sharing earlier about the concept of like our food system having overlap in family or our relation to different components in the food system. And it's brought up a story for me. And somebody was visiting and the cows were bellowing. The heat of the day was just starting to come. And the cows had been out grazing and they were looking for their calves because their bags were starting to get full and they needed their calves to milk. And the person who was visiting said, "Does that sound like money to you?" And it caught me off guard. And I said, "No, that sounds like family to me." But I think that really is an aspect of individuals who are engaged in revitalizing local food systems or who are approaching leadership in their food business with that indigenous perspective. It's not simply about the profit aspect. It's about the well-being of the family that you're growing, whether that be the little one that is playing in the other room with Nana right now, or if it's the four-legged relatives that we are fortunate to be able to co-steward on inland management practices. I think that really what was an instrumental experience in my transition into starting the direct-to-consumer beef business is that first year I loaded up my calf crop as a larger share owner in the family ranching business and taking those calves to the sale barn, seeing them come across the scale. Oh, they looked so good. They weighed up good. They had good hair. They were just nice and docile. There wasn't this smorgasbord of mixing in the ring. I was proud of them. And they sold good. And then they left out the door. And it occurred to me, I was never, ever going to know where or how they entered the food system. And that was really alarming to me because I knew that from that point forward, no person in that food system chain was likely going to care for that animal with the intention that I had put into their life that up until that point. And then I got in my vehicle and we drove home 98 miles, and I drove past countless homes that faced food insecurity. And I just felt compelled to work to address that a little bit. I realized that it was going to be an interesting path because there wasn't a clear, this is the steps that you follow to start a food business in South Dakota. This is how you do things legally in South Dakota. I often joke to people who are entering into the food business, all right, well, there might be a phase where you're bootlegging beef, and then there's going to be a phase where you're actually in the beef business, and it's not all the time transparent to people to understand what applies where. And so there was definitely a transition in my era of growth as a business, and trying to navigate that and to ask questions to the right people and to figure out what that looked like. So we started with selling beef quarters, and we would sell quarters, halves, or wholes to individuals who I would help with dropping the animal off at the processor, and they would then take care of processing, payment to the butcher. They would pay me for a portion of the live animal, etc. The reality is, a lot of who I wanted to have be able to access my product wasn't going to be able to buy that large of a share of an animal, either A, because of the economic investment, or B, it's hard to store a whole half of a cow. And so we started to identify ways to establish a relationship with a state inspected processing facility. And we were able to get that lined up at Brock's Butcher Block in Oneida, South Dakota. I still remember the night before my first drop off for my state inspected slots, a blizzard blew in. And I had the tractor hooked up to the horse trailer, and we were going to drag it down the gravel road if we needed to, with the pickup behind it. And my uncle, who was helping me load that morning, he was like, you're going pretty hard at this, right? Like, don't you think you can reschedule? And I'm like, I've been waiting 90 days for this state inspection slot. No, we can't reschedule. And he knew how important that was too. He's like, oh, we'll make it happen. Don't worry. And we were in the dark. There was snow whacking us in the face. I mean, it was quite the ordeal. And then a few months later, I remember carrying in like 1,700 pounds of ground burger. And I'm like, you're insane, Kelsey. How are you going to possibly, like, what is the matter with you? And then COVID hit, and the disruption in our food system happened so immediately that what I thought was supposed to last me 3 months, as far as just doing like small burger bundle sales, was gone in 2 weeks. And so we just recognized that, wow, it's not always that the local consumers don't want to buy local. It's that there's not an awareness around how important it is to know where your meat product is coming from. So very early on in our business, that became a staple in the leadership and the execution of how we would make the business decisions, is making sure that the customer had the ability to feel empowered and informed in where their product was coming from. And I still, to this day, I don't advocate for my product over anybody else's. What I advocate for is for you to feel like you have trust in where your product is coming from. And as long as you have trust in where your product is coming from, and you understand their practices, and you understand the principles behind their leadership and their business, then to me, that's the transition towards a more healed food system. We now are doing a lot of direct-to-consumer business. We do farmers market stands. We have an online purchasing platform where people can make orders. We try to do like monthly specials, which gives individuals kind of a bundle access price, but not at the largest size of what like a quarter would be. So we'll do a couple of steaks, a couple of roasts, a couple of pounds of burger to round it out. We have aligned ourselves with a couple of larger scale vendors. So we have a couple of restaurants who has a similar like-minded approach to revitalizing the local food system and really centering people around knowing where your food's coming from. And so we provide them with access to our product to sell through on their menu as well. And we do some work with a food cooperative nearby, which helps us to move a large share of our overhead product, basically, is what I call it, where we wouldn't be able to get it through our existing channels. The other core value that's been really critical and how we have conducted and grown our business with each step is recognizing that family is at the heart of any level of success that we've had, whether it be from word of mouth in getting information out about our sales or our product, or helping to tell our story, or rolling up their sleeves and helping me to get product unloaded, doing inventory, going to the farmers markets. All last summer, pretty much every Saturday, my mother and my sister were up by 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and off to a farmer's market we were heading. And very much so volunteerism in what drives my family to contribute to this effort, in feeling value in their contribution to what we believe DX Beef is helping to do within the communities. That being said, there are some driving factors in our own assessment of family well-being and health that have had to kind of be disrupted before we would realize that our overall goal of healing the food system, healing our communities through this work that we do, healing the land through our management practices, it was not necessarily healing ourselves, because we were running so hard to make all of these deadlines. I mean, planning to try to process 12 animals per month at a 4-head per day facility, all of the back and forth, doing the beef deliveries for 5 pounds of burger that was like an hour away. I mean, it was just go nonstop. And it was really starting to put negative implications into my well-being, into my well-being of my relationships with those in my family who are helping to make it happen. It was taking a lot of that fun out of it for me. And so the activity where you said, where are you spending your time, and how does that time assignment impact the energy that you're spending? That's a really meaningful project for me to continue to do moving forward. And it's really, without the structure, what I did with my family a couple almost a year ago now, when we realized we have to stop planning for continued growth right now, because it just doesn't fit with the needs that we have in other spaces of running our business. And so we scaled back. We're doing a more manageable workload now. We're really refining our messaging and trying to save more space for having more of our time committed to establishing the conversation with the customers and empowering them to carry forward that mindset and approach that we've hoped to inspire, rather than just constantly trying to count the widgets of the ins and outs of inventory and drive profits as best as we can. And in another aspect, speaking of profit, to mention is that we're very much so not profit driven. We're community well-being driven, and we do everything that we can to keep our overhead costs low, so that our product can be as accessible as possible, as a nutritious, healthy product in the community homes that need it the most. So one of our largest successes in my book is being able to become an EBT SNAP certified vendor, being able to make sure that those who face food insecurity do have access to be able to purchase product from us. We've also been very fortunate to be featured as a vendor in our tribe's recent emergency assistance program household payment disbursements. And so it's just really recognizing that by just offering a value to the community and being able to have the belief system and the core values rooted in our mission and our vision in a way that when these opportunities arise, we're not persuaded or pulled in a direction that's not in line with what our core value system is, simply because there could be profit to be made. We're really holding true to that concept of connecting the consumer, healing our food system, healing our land, and doing the best that we can to do just for those animals that no longer now leave that sale barn door and I never see them again. Now more and more of them animals are staying on the ranch until it's time for them to enter into the local community food system. And that really makes my heart happy. And it's a part of what keeps us doing the work that we're doing.
Awesome. I really love the idea that y'all scaled back and that you're not shy to tell us that, and that you consider that a huge success. And it's something that I come up against a lot in working with producers, to encourage them to remember that getting smaller or even stopping farming sometimes can be a massive success for their well-being and their family, because they're stopping and taking stock of everything that's important to them. So just a reminder that we're not here in this series pushing growth. We're here pushing learning and finding a business that is well suited to your values. And that starts with knowing them. I want to ask you one question that you can answer in 1 minute.
Sounds good.
Really putting you on the block here. I just want to hear how you feel, your sense. What is your sense of leadership inside of your business? You know, what influences your idea of leadership? We've been talking about leadership the whole day. Like, what's leadership to you as the owner operator of DX Beef?
Yeah, I was really brought up around the concept of mimicking nature in management practices. And that was in the context of, you know, like when we calve or how we approach addressing a sick animal, or, you know, like green grass is the best medicine, things like that. And as I've come into my own professional development journey, I too have completed the agroecology coaching program that Chance mentioned earlier. And I really value a systems thought process to leadership, and thinking about the greater ecosystem that you're a part of, rather than the ecosystem that you're controlling or exercising dominion over in any space. And what I realized in reflecting, it was really relatively recent when I was taking a break on my maternity leave, which doesn't qualify as a break in my opinion. But while I was on maternity leave, I was really reflecting on some of where we've come with DX Beef, and I realized that the the approach to making everything happen while we were on that growth trajectory was not me existing in the ecosystem. It was me controlling or trying to exert dominion over that ecosystem of growth of DX Beef, and it was not organic. It didn't feel good. It's a part of why my anxiety started to skyrocket and my stress levels were through the roof, and I wasn't sleeping and I dreaded butcher day. Like it was a misalignment of my practice in leadership and how I believe leadership best exists and how I want to be existing in a leader. And once I got that more in tune, there's almost like a decommissioning from that existence I'm still working through. But I'm really happy about the trajectory that we're heading on, and that family is the focus again in the conversations that we have around growing this and feeding our communities.
Awesome answer. Thank you. So I want to open it up to Q&A, and I want to encourage everybody to ask any one of us questions that feel meaningful. And we have a good one in the chat already that I'm going to synthesize a little bit from Philip. And he says, in my experience, I came upon an authoritarian type of leadership, not authoritative, and lost my home and cattle, barn, and livelihood. You talk about documenting failures. However, if leadership puts you in a position or blocks your success using tribal sovereignty rights, how do you recover from that? And I'm going to throw this to Kelsey and Chance as other Native folks first to respond. I'm happy to chime in as well.
I'm of the mindset that it's not always the things that you do, it's how you do them. And so I really think that the approach that you can apply in any space is just as meaningful as the tasks or the responsibilities that you have to carry forward. Without having maybe a little more specific understanding of the actual tasks that are being mentioned, I feel like that's a rather cliche answer, but I don't know how to answer it more specifically right now. So I'll kick it over to Chance and see what he's got.
Yeah, I hate cliche answers, but it's one of those things where I guess without knowing a little more specifics and without invading someone's privacy in front of everyone, just in terms of, I guess, the specifics of how leadership can block something like that. I was also in the BIA for many years as a realty specialist, so understanding how contracts work, we can maybe help you define how that happened or what that looks like. But like I said, I don't want to have someone overshare or do something that they're not ready. But I think our emails are mentioned in the end, and so I'd be more than happy to follow up with you, and we can dive more into the nuts and bolts of how that works. So.
Yeah, let me drop everybody's contact information in right now, and we really encourage you guys to get in touch with us. And I think what Chance is saying is that there's two approaches, or what we're all saying. There's the psychological approach to embracing why that happened and being able to change your mindset about it being an opportunity. And then there's the practical approach, which is like, do you have all of the information for understanding what happened? And can you take the time and energy to seek it instead of just feeling disgruntled and upset? Those emotions are valuable, but what can you do to change what happened? And what can you do to help others that might be subject to the same situation? And if you've done that and you're still pissed off, then go with that emotion. But I think it's about that due diligence as well, alongside knowing that something is valuable in that experience. And that might sound harsh or from a privileged position, but I do really believe that there's some element of value in that horrible experience that we have to be strong enough to find and diligent enough to also make sure that we're knowing that we're finding out all the information that we need to help change it on a practical level as well. All right, other questions? Feel free to raise your hand and we can hear your beautiful voice, or drop thoughts in the Q&A. And I definitely encourage you guys to reach out to us after the fact as well. Anybody else got any other thoughts? I'm shocked if we're actually going to end this early. It's going to be miraculous.
Now you feel silly about putting a time limit, don't you?
I know, right? You want to go back to your dominion over your ecosystem answer, Kelsey, and give us some more sound bites?
No, I like how succinct it was, thanks to the time frame.
I'm usually not good at keeping people on task inside of my facilitation role, so I should just give people time limits more often verbally.
I guess one thing that I would share is what I've really valued in having DXB as my playground for exploring some of my own leadership, really, is that I'm able to start to see alignment or misalignment as I enter into other sectors or other spaces, whether I'm on a review committee for a project, or I'm on this local community initiative, or my work at the IAC. It really brings about an awareness of how valuable those core values in your leadership are, and how necessary it is that those core values are readily communicated to the people you're working with. So no matter where you're at in your food business journey or your direct to consumer venture into meat to market space, or if you just join from a leadership standpoint, I think that what we discussed today is relevant. And any instance where we might have said meat business, etc., then just replace it with the exact scenario that's facing you in your reality.
Thanks for that, Kelsey. Yeah, I feel like, this is material that applies to all of us and everything that we do, and it's not designed to be specific for livestock producers out there, even though that's the overarching, program. It's either apply this to wherever you need to in your life. And yes, so just a reminder here, someone's asking about the recording. I'm going to drop these things back in the chat. Our emails are also in the presentation. So to find the video in the presentation, you're going to go to Mighty Networks, which is also going to be linked in a follow-up email that we're going to give you, which is also going to have that nice little survey in there. So we would love for you to fill that out. And I think if anybody else has any, and if no one else has any other questions, I thank you all for your comments. I'm impressed with everybody piping up, and I really appreciate that. And makes it worth our while to hear your voices alongside of ours. And I'm sorry that we didn't have more time for things like breakout group exercises. Chance and I have a lot of those. So maybe we'll dream up a half-day workshop at next year's IAC conference, and we can do whatever we want. All right. Well, we'll let all of you get on with your morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. And thank you so much to Chance and Kelsey for joining us. And our next webinar is slated for March 1st. So keep in touch with the Meat to Market program. And hopefully we'll see you on some others.